So I want to offer a little bit about cell phone computing. What you're looking at is my open web browser on a big 27-inch monitor. I have a program called Screen Copy, SCRCPY, that can be found on GitHub that was built by somebody who wanted to broadcast a cell phone screen onto a computer. The essence of cell phone computing is to do as much as possible of my internet-based work on the cell phone. Problem is, when you really start working with a cell phone, the screen's too small, it's hard to type, for instance, to answer email and such. And so there are different ways to do that. You can get a Bluetooth keyboard for the cell phone, and I've done that, and that worked fine. However, when you go to broadcast the cell phone screen to a monitor, it becomes very problematic. There are casting options, but they require an active internet connection. And all in all, that was really unsatisfactory trying to figure that out. What I did locate was a way to broadcast that cell phone screen to a computer window. So as opposed to this being a dumb monitor, this is in fact my desktop computer. And using this program, this app, SCRCPY, Screen Copy, I'm able to show my cell phone screen on the computer. And so this is a full-size window of that cell phone screen. And I'll unlock with my fingerprint here. And this is my cell phone screen. Well, there are a couple of problems with using the cell phone screen for different things. One of those is that the real estate isn't used as if you were looking at a full-size monitor. The real estate is used as if you were looking at a small screen. So, for instance, the fonts here, I've set up on my cell phone screen to be big enough to read when I'm looking at that screen. But now I've got a huge 27-inch monitor in front of me, so I can stand to have those fonts quite a bit smaller on the cell phone screen. Likewise, portrait orientation doesn't help me as much as landscape orientation would do. And so when we do things, for instance, like looking at a Google document, this is very big. And notice that I am actually scrolling with my mouse and the keyboard. That font is far bigger than it needs to be for me to actually use the cell phone. And furthermore, a horizontal orientation, which I can create with the cell phone itself, makes that even more evident. That font is huge, and I don't need it that huge. So there are adjustments on the cell phone that can compensate for these things. For instance, stopping the automatic rotation, or with the right program, one can permanently shift or quasi-permanently shift the orientation of the cell phone screen. So what I wanted to show here from the home button is there's an app called Automate, with which I have created a couple of shortcuts of my own that will orient the screen, change the font and the display density, and I can show you that setting. That setting lives under display. Those two settings live under display advanced. One is the font size, one is the display size. When I alter those, the cell phone screen is actually much better suited toward this kind of work on a bigger screen. And again, I have an app that automates that, and I'll execute that app and we'll see how well it does now that we're trying to demonstrate. It does in fact make these adjustments and change the orientation of the screen. So now, when I open that same document that I had looked at before, I have a much more usable font, and I can actually get in here and edit this document in a way that's really, really feasible. So anything that I would do in that vein that had to be connected to the internet, like Google Docs, like these, I can do through the cell phone. The reason this is relevant is for those of us who want to work from anywhere, internet connectivity is one of the huge problems to solve. And it turns out that Verizon throttles the amount of hotspot activity even in an unlimited plan, which means the more work that I can do directly through the cell phone, the more is part of the actual unlimited internet plan that I have with Verizon. So with that in mind, I won't open a bunch of windows because I'm not sure what information will show up. But I do have email apps, and I do need to do email through the cell phone connection wherever I can, and I will offer you that in the same way that this document editing is now a lot more suited toward this big screen, the same is true for the email apps that I have. And I can, in fact, as opposed to when I use for instance, Firefox or Chrome, as opposed to reading those in the app version of the browser, I can request the desktop site in those browsers and actually have a really close facsimile to the web view that I would see with a full-on internet browser on a desktop. So it gets a lot closer. But in some cases, being able to use the desktop site from Firefox does make all the difference in how usable and legible the page is, how effectively it uses this new screen resolution that's set up for the cell phone. And take my word for it, I could not read this text, certainly without magnification, on my cell phone right now. But because I'm broadcasting the cell phone here to the full-size monitor, I can use this quite well. With that in mind, I also have an application that will revert the cell phone back for use, because I assure you that I can barely read this text on the cell phone screen itself. Although it's quite legible on this full-size screen, I can barely use that on the cell phone itself. So that is the essence of this cell phone computing. I have multiple apps that I can use here that actually are entirely usable. I can finish the work that I need to do using the apps on the cell phone, which relieves me from having to use the cell phone as a hotspot, and that is the point.